In April 2018, David Tronis believed he was on the brink of reality TV stardom. The 50-year-old stay-at-home husband was set to appear on Zombie House Flipping, a renovation show that promised exposure and the chance to show off the Orlando home he was transforming. But the promise of fame was short-lived. His wife, 39-year-old Shanti Cooper, refused to sign off on the production. She wasn't interested in the spotlight. Within hours of that rejection, David would murder his wife in a brutal act that stunned the community. At 3:51 p.m. on April 24, 2018, David placed a 911 call from his home in the upscale Delaney Park neighborhood of Orlando.
Hello?
She stopped breathing and trying to do CPR. I can't.
Okay, listen to me. Can you tell me what you're...
When first responders arrived, they found Shanti lying lifeless in the living room. Blood had pooled around her nose and mouth. David claimed he found her in a partially filled bathtub, unconscious and not breathing. He said he had pulled her out to attempt CPR. But none of what officers observed made sense. The tub was barely wet, the carpet was dry, and the timeline didn't add up. David was taken to the police station as a witness. He changed into a paper custody suit, was offered water and snacks, and was placed in interrogation room 6. He sat alone for 4 hours, occasionally crying, asking politely for the bathroom or a drink. Investigators were already watching his every move, noting how calm and composed he remained. When detectives finally entered the room at 9:08 p.m., they opened with condolences. "David, I know this is traumatic for you. We're going to help you through this." David, soft-spoken and overly polite, responded with subdued grief. But the cracks in his performance showed early. He repeatedly asked for crackers, for water, for comfort. Small things that seemed misplaced for a man who had just lost his wife in a traumatic accident. Detectives Teresa Sprague and Barb McClelland led the questioning. They began with background. David and Shanti had met on Match.com in 2013. 5 months later, David moved from Minnesota to Florida and into Shanti's home. They eventually purchased a property together, though technically it was placed in a trust under David and his mother's names. Shanti's name was not included, for financial planning reasons, David claimed. They were never legally married, despite David frequently referring to her as his wife. The detectives wanted to understand their relationship. David painted a picture of harmony. "We never fought. We were best friends. We did everything together." But outside perspectives painted a very different story. Keith Ory, producer of Zombie House Flipping, said David was desperate to be on the show. It had become his full-time job. Shanti, however, was never enthusiastic. When Keith insisted on meeting her before moving forward, she reluctantly agreed. The meeting was tense and awkward. "It was obvious she didn't want to be there," Keith later testified in court. "She left as soon as she could." That meeting took place just 6 days before Shanti was killed. Inside the interrogation room, David shifted topics rapidly, talking about kitchen remodels, staircases, and brand partnerships. He spoke passionately about window upgrades and custom tile work, barely holding back tears when discussing countertops. But when pressed about Shanti herself, what she was like, what they last spoke about, his answers became vague, evasive. The timeline David offered to police went like this. The night before Sunday was family night. They ate an early dinner, watched American Idol, and went to bed around 9 p.m. On Monday morning, Shanti came downstairs around 7:30 a.m. and told David she had a dentist appointment. He left shortly after to walk the dogs. "I went to Lake Orange," he said, beginning to fake cry again. He claimed he returned home a short while later, fed the dogs, and went upstairs to check on Shanti. That's when he found her unconscious in the tub, water trickling out of the faucet, blood in the water. He said he pulled her out and tried to revive her. But there was no visible blood in the bathroom, no wet footprints, no sign she had ever been moved. The detectives listened to his story but didn't buy it. They had already received initial reports from the medical examiner. Shanti's injuries were not consistent with a fall. She had a black eye, bruises on both sides of her face, a fractured skull, and signs of strangulation. "David," Detective Sprague said, her tone sharpening, "I think she was dead before you ever left the house." David shook his head, repeated denials, and began crying again. But the detectives didn't comfort him this time. They pressed harder. "Did you hit her? Strangle her? Did you lose control?" "Absolutely not," David replied. He was offered a polygraph test. He agreed to it eagerly. "Absolutely. I'd be happy to take one." Detective Sprague confronted him directly. "How do you explain the bruising? The black eyes? There's no sign of a struggle in the bathroom. No blood on the carpet. No water anywhere. How did she get from the tub to the living room without leaving a trail?" David began stammering, then reverted back to his renovation stories, talking about trusses and subflooring. The detectives cut him off. "You killed this woman. You fake cried for 8 hours straight and haven't shed a single tear. You've been lying since we brought you in." David denied it all, but he was unraveling. By 4:56 a.m., the detectives walked out, and David sat alone, pale and shaking. Just over 2 hours later, he asked to go home. They let him go. 4 months later, in August 2018, a grand jury indicted David Tronis for the murder of Shanti Cooper. He was arrested at his mother's home and claimed insanity, saying he didn't know what had happened. He was transferred to a maximum security psychiatric facility, where he remained for 5 years until a judge ruled him competent to stand trial in 2023. The trial began on October 12, 2023. Prosecutors argued that David had beaten and strangled Shanti to death after she refused to sign off on his reality show contract. They described the murder as deliberate and premeditated. She had a fractured skull, severe bruising. She was attacked in the bedroom, then dragged to the bathroom. This wasn't a random act. This was a calculated killing. David's defense tried to pin the murder on a mystery intruder, claiming that someone else must have broken in and killed Shanti while David was walking the dogs. But no evidence supported this. There was no forced entry, no foreign DNA. Nothing had been stolen. And then came the final blow. The autopsy. Shanti Cooper's death was a horrifying culmination of violence that could not be ignored. The autopsy revealed a series of brutal injuries that told a chilling story. Blunt force trauma to her head, severe brain swelling and bruising around her neck. Internal injuries further indicated the violent nature of her final moments. The medical examiner's ruling was unambiguous. Her death was caused by homicidal violence, including strangulation. In the courtroom, emotions ran high as the truth of what happened to Shanti was laid bare. But it was her teenage son Jackson who delivered the most haunting blow, not with accusations, but with memories. He stood before the judge and jury, his voice quiet but his words loaded with sorrow and longing. "My family and I have been waiting 5 years for justice," he said. "I miss her so much. I miss walking the dogs, going to the park. She was the best mom I could ever ask for." There was no rage in his statement, only love and profound grief, a grief made heavier by the years of silence and waiting. Jackson's statement was a reminder that this case wasn't just about legal procedures. It was about a life stolen and a family shattered. His pain echoed through the courtroom, a voice for every moment lost, every holiday missed, and every hug denied. Shanti's absence was not just a tragedy, it was a daily wound, especially for her son, who had been forced to grow up without the comfort of his mother's presence. His words served as a gut-wrenching reminder that justice is not just a verdict, but a long and painful road for those left behind. The judge didn't mince words. "You are adjudicated guilty of first-degree murder," he declared. With that, David Tronis was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. It was the harshest penalty available, and the only one that could even begin to balance the scales. Tronis would now spend the rest of his days behind bars, cut off from the life he once knew. For Shanti's loved ones, the sentence brought some closure, but no true healing. Justice had finally arrived, but it came at an immeasurable cost. Today, David Tronis is incarcerated at the Graceville Correctional Facility in Florida. His dreams of reality television have been replaced with a life of isolation, concrete walls, and constant surveillance. Shanti Cooper was remembered by friends and co-workers as a brilliant financial consultant, a loving mother, and a kind-hearted woman who had supported David financially and emotionally through all of their years together. Her tragic death became another haunting reminder of how emotional abuse, when left unchecked, can escalate into deadly violence. This wasn't just the story of a failed reality TV pilot. It was the story of a woman silenced in her own home by the very person who claimed to love her. David Tronis will spend the rest of his life behind bars. But no sentence can bring back Shanti Cooper, a woman whose only mistake was trusting the wrong person. May her story be a reminder, behind some perfect facades lies something deadly. If this story moved you, like, share, and subscribe for more true crime stories that need to be heard.